So I've wanted to give you the history of Ballinderry Park for quite some time now, but to be honest, it's difficult to do because it's not written down. Now, we started searching for answers, and last night we met with a local, his name's Theo, who gave us the lay of the land in terms of how places like this, one of the best preserved Franciscan friaries in the country, connect to big houses in the area. So in today's video, I'm going to try and really give you the history. Let's get into it.
Will young uniform minds and uniform lines and uniform ties run round with trousers on fire and signs of desire they cannot disguise? Whilst I try to find words as light as the birds that circle above, composing the songs of love.
No, that is. Have you been in the Abbey yet?
I've only just been down briefly.
That's the Ballinderry headstone, right? That's Cummins's, okay?
Oh, right, okay.
No, it's quite a big one, but the bottom of it, you'd want to chalk it. You know, if you rub it with chalk, the writing comes up.
Okay, yeah.
Now, when you go inside the door of Kilconnell Abbey, there's a massive tomb on the left-hand side with 6 saints in it, and they're all French. They were built by French masons. Saint Denis of Paris, Saint Louis of Toulouse, and so on. Saint James of Compostela. He's the Camino chap.
Oh yes. Yeah.
But when you look at them, the Blessed Virgin is there, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and the other one, the 6th altar, is Saint John the Baptist.
Okay.
Now, I was at a tour there. Christy Cunniff did it, and he was explaining. There's a little shell on Saint James to identify him. John the Baptist has. You could hardly see a camel skin he was standing on. Apparently he lived on locusts and wild honey and all this kind of stuff. But you could identify them all. But up at the top there's St. Francis, and he has a little triangle. If you look, he's up at the top beside St. Patrick, and he has a little triangle here where his heart is, and that's the sign that he had the stigmata. You know, his hands bled every Good Friday, like Padre Pio. I think Padre Pio was a friar. But anyway, the Franciscans for some reason came to Kilconnell. The Kellys were looking for somebody to put here, you know. Now, there's different, there's Augustinians, there's Dominicans, Portumna has different orders, but it just so happens the Franciscans at the time in that 1300s were looking for places in Ireland, and they built 4 or 5. There's one in Annadown, I think. Okay. The reason it's in Kilconnell is because we're on the road from Dublin. Now, Dublin existed, but Galway didn't, but there was a line of sandhills across the country called the Escarida, they're called moraines. When one of the ice ages stopped temporarily, all the sand fell down, and all the way across Ireland, the Midlands, as far as Galway, there's these sand hills. And Shane Lowry, the golfer, his club is called Esker Hills. They're in Tullamore.
Oh, Esker, the stonemason.
Yeah.
The quarry, sorry.
Yeah, Esker means a thing. So anyway, Kilconnell was on this, it's called the Slieve Moor. It was the road across the country. You couldn't cross Ireland that time by land unless you were up on these sandhills. You were down on the bog otherwise, or in the forest.
Right, okay.
So Kilconnell was on it.
Okay.
And there was a very good well nearby, and there was an old monastery by a fellow called Connell, I'm called Connell, that's my first name. Mm-hmm. My mother called that Connell, But that had disappeared, it was St. Patrick's followers, St. Kieran at Clonmacnoise and all that, but it had disappeared, but there was remains of it there, and there was a kind of a tradition. So the pick Kilconnell, it was easy to find if you were looking for it, and it was built around the middle 1300s, bit by bit. It's like a cross now, it's like a compass. It's facing north, south, east and west, The tower is in the middle. A curious thing about the Abbey, the Abbey is Christy Cunniff told me that it's one of the best preserved in Ireland because the roof, the roofs here, if you go into Kilconnell Church, you'll see the same kind of things, rafters and all that, and you see these stones coming out, semicircular stones that were the base. You see them in the Abbey as well. That was the way they did. They took all the weight and they transferred it out to the wall. But there was no slates in Kilconnell. There were timber shingles like in America. For some reason, we're so far away from slate quarries.
Okay.
Down in Clare and Liscannor, they have this flat stone. Yeah. It's very heavy, but some of the monasteries there but Kilconnell was so far from anywhere that they did it with slices of timber. Christy Cunniff was saying that it was burned a number of times, but the first time it was burned, it went up so quickly that the walls didn't go. That's what happens normally when the stone, like Notre Dame or some of these places, when there's a big fire, the stone doesn't burn and it keeps the heat in and it pushes the walls out. And this is why Portumna, the walls are gone, Clontuskert, the walls are gone, but Kilconnell is perfect. You could actually roof it as it is because it went up so quickly. No, they may have roofed bits of it after with rushes or something, but that was it.
And what burnt it down?
But there was two main things. The Cromwellians was one, and at the Williamites was another. But it was during the Cromwellian times it was burned first. Now there was Irish people burning it as well. Like Kelly had his own enemies in the area, and they were very fond of burning each other's places and taking their cattle and all that. But anyway, sometime around it was only 15 something or other. Calthorpe was the man. Now, a lot of these English names come in because we were on the way to Galway, and Galway city was a big town at the time. It wasn't, it wasn't there 1,000 years ago, but it was certainly there around 1200 or something. And Kilconnell was on the way, so the Cromwellians passed by, and they burned it in passing. And it was beautiful stained glass windows and everything in it, and it was plastered. Now you only see the stone, but the plaster inside is all gone. It was coloured and painted. There was frescoes and everything in it. Okay. There's an odd place here now you can still see the plaster. There was bullock's blood put into the plaster. Okay. To slaughter an awful lot of animals in the winter. They didn't have silage or hay or anything. Okay. And the blood, for some reason, was mixed into the mortar and it made it stick better, Anyway, the layout of it, it's like a cross. There's a nave and a chancel. And the nave is where the ordinary people, when you go inside the main gate, that's where the ordinary people went for mass. They stood up. Now further on, past the tower, is the chancel, and that's where the big shots were on seats. And up there is where all these, what are they called? They're called altar tombs. And that's where the altar was facing east. The altar was always under the big east window, Yeah. And then on the left-hand side, when you go into Kilconnell, there are these, it's called a cloister, and a little garden in the middle, called a cloister garden. That's where the monks would walk around, say, in their office. Okay. Now, I have a sister and nun, right? We were all going to be priests one time, but you have to read some your stuff every day, your breviary or something. It's a special little missal. What today is the 14th of March, so it would be a passage from such and such a gospel, Psalms and all that. And while you're reading it, you're walking around, and that's the whole idea. Now that's still there in Kilconnell, but not all of it. Little archways. But anyway, where are we? The Battle of Aughrim. My sister now, Patricia, she's a teacher. I'm not a history teacher, but Patricia's a history teacher, and she did her masters on the Abbey in the 1900s, and the 18th century, the 1800s, the 19th century. During that time, Lord Clonbrach, who was still in Fohana, decided he had enough, that these schools was against the law of nature, so he had all the schools collected in Aughrim, and they were brought to Kilconnell, and they were left to the Abbey, and they were left around. Now they say there was up to 9,000 deaths in the battle in Aughrim. Anyway, all these schools, getting back to it, Clonbrach moved, and they were in Kilconnell. They were surrounded Kilconnell Abbey for ages and ages, and we don't know where they are. They must have been buried inside. There was a famous guy called Arthur Young. He was an agricultural improver. He used to go around from big house to big house looking to see how we drain bogs and passing on. He was going to Woodlawn one day, and he stopped at Kilconnell and he remarked, he said, shouldn't they bury these things? It was heathen, to have all these schools. But there was thousands of schools making a wall around the Abbey. And according to my sister's research, it was still in the early 1800s, they were still there. And then suddenly they were gone. So obviously they were put in. So they must have brought up the floor of the Abbey, because a lot of if you go down to the Abbey now, there's an awful lot of archways, and you have to stoop. I'm not tall enough, but you have to bend your head going in. So, plus there was lots of people buried. You know the way muck accumulates and all that, So, but the last ever case of a Protestant, the penal laws of a prosecution where a priest was seen saying mass and he shouldn't, was 1820-something in Kilconnell. It was brought by the guy in Ballinderry, Lord Cloncarty, but he couldn't get anyone to testify against the priest. And it was one of the monks. They were saying mass somewhere around the Abbey. That was 1820-something. It's in one of the books, which was the last ever anti-popery trial, and it fell down, Right, wow. Amazing. But when we were kids, there was an old lady, Monnie Lyons. It was a big family. She lived across from the church. She used to ring the bell for, the 6 o'clock bell and the 12 o'clock, but that's automatic now. She used to do it by hand, a big chain. But she knew all the history, and she was telling us, she'd be kind of frightening us to keep us away from the tower, because the tower is very dangerous. You could, if you came out on top, you're high up, there's big open windows, no glass in them. Yeah. But she'd said that there was a few stories that during the two sieges, when it was taken over during the Cromwellians, first of all, some guy tied up a horse in it, and the following day the horse was dead, the following morning, tied him to an altar, Now, I've heard this before. So maybe it didn't happen. But she said that they roasted the friar, the Cromwellians. The Cromwellians were worse than the Williamites. they roasted the friar on a griddle or something like that. And the following day, there was a grid burdened into the thing underneath them. There was tombstones everywhere, flat ones, like this thing.
Yeah.
So she showed it to us, and I remember it. Well, you could vaguely make out a cross. Now, whether it was done artificially or not, I don't know. There's a room called the Hidden Room in it, which when you go into it and go down behind the tower, you have to step down into it, and it's completely surrounded by walls, and the roof is gone. But it's a big walled, what do you call it? A big walled inscription for this man called Barnwall. And it's very well done. He was transported across to Connacht. He gave up a big place in Meath, and he was lamented on the thing that he was now in such poor straits by the usurper Cromwell. And this is actually, in other words, here I am in this piss hole of a place, and I had so much land and buried here before, and asking us to pray for him and his descendants, That was the way. To a certain degree, we were off the beaten track. This is the third road to Dublin, you could say. Like, when I was a young fella, this was the main road to Dublin, Athenry. Just, the old Slee, it was called the Slee Moor.
Yeah.
But that was the way anyone who's going to the Galway race, you see all these big cars coming up from Meath and Offaly and everything to the Galway race. Then they built the Lochray Road through Aughrim, which is a good road, and then they built the motorway.
Yeah.
So we're really, when you Google anything and you want to get it, like, we never come up on the thing. So it's not, you know what I mean? People don't accidentally come into it unless, now they're coming because it's recommended here and there, but sometimes Kilconnell is not on the map at all.
Yeah, sure.
And Trust is on it for some reason, which is a crossroads or a pump. There's nothing in it. It's down below Calla, There was a church, a Protestant church for Kilconnell. There was no Catholic church.
Okay.
But he died. He was supposed to have been, I looked him up, I can't think of his name now, but he died. He got famine fever. He went out of his way for the Catholics to look after them and feed them and everything. He died of famine. But when he died, the guy in Woodlawn demolished the church and took all the stones, and he opened his own church on his own estate, and it's still there in Woodlawn, And Kilconnell has a Protestant a rectory still there, a Protestant graveyard, but in between the two where the church was, nothing. The landlord took advantage of it, so he wanted everything. If you go up to Woodlawn, because Woodlawn has a very good history group, they have booklets and everything. If you go to the big house, you'll see a road, dead straight road to the railway. He insisted, like a few more of them, no railway. There was supposed to be a railway in Kilconnell, but he wouldn't go through his land unless they put the station on his land, right beside the house. So the next thing, he wanted the church. Instead of having to drive down to Kilconnell 3 or 4 miles, he did it. And it's quite unusual. They have evensong and whatever their ceremonies they have. It's still up and running. Yeah. But that's the history of it. In the 1840s or something, he took it. And he actually, Christy Cunningham told me that there's a few items in it. The baptismal font is from Kilconnell Abbey. They took it. It's not marble, it's granite or something, but it's an octagonal pond. It's from Kilconnell Abbey and a few more things like that. But he just, for his own convenience, Lord Ashtown. But I'm saying, but besides this place and the Abbey, there was a church. There was a rectory, and that's what happened to the Protestant Church of Kilconnell. Your man lifted it. That's what they would do.
So, something a little bit different this time. Thanks very much for watching. It was hard, as you can probably tell, to tell the story of a place like Ballinderry without explaining the history of the area. Because at one time, the land I'm sitting on now was owned by the Friary in Kilconnell. So really interesting to sit down with Theo and understand the lay of the land and how places like the Franciscan Friary connected to big houses in the area. There is so much to show you here at Ballinderry, and I'm sorry we've been a little slow with the videos, but we've been documenting the whole process and cannot wait to share the next updates with you. See you next time.